This is the Sea of Galilee. So many important things happen by this sea that we need a small piece of it here to help tell the stories. Now, there are lots of towns and villages by the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus and his disciples spent a lot of time in Galilee. One day, a little girl was very sick. She was only 12 years old, and she was dying. Her father, Jairus, was very well known in the community. He was a leader in the synagogue. And when Jairus saw that Jesus had returned from across the sea, he fell at his feet, pleading, "My little girl is dying. Please come, touch her so she will live." And so Jesus went with him to his home. And a great crowd followed. Now in the crowd was a woman who had been bleeding inside her body for 12 years. She had been to all the doctors, and none of them could heal her. But she believed that Jesus could heal her. She thought, if I could just touch the hem of his clothes, I know I would be made well again. And so she came up behind Jesus in the crowd, and she touched his cloak. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. She could feel in her body that she was healed. And at the moment that she touched Jesus, he felt power go out from him. And so he turned around and asked, "Who touched me?" Jesus' disciples said, "Lord, there are so many people in the crowd pushing up against you." But Jesus looked all around to see who it was who had touched him. Trembling with fear, the woman came forward. And she told Jesus her whole story. Jesus listened and then said, "My daughter, you are made well because you believe. Go in peace. You will have no more suffering." Then someone came to Jairus and said, "Your daughter is dead." Jesus turned to Jairus and said, "Don't be afraid. Only believe." And when they got to Jairus' house, there was a great crowd of people who were weeping and wailing loudly. And when Jesus entered, he said, "Why do you make such a commotion? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. And Jesus sent them all outside, except for the child's father and mother, and Peter and James and John. And Jesus went in where the child lay. And he looked at the child and took her by her hand and said, Talitha cum, which is Hebrew for, little lamb, get up. And immediately the little girl stood up. And she began to walk about. Everyone was overcome with amazement and joy. And Jesus said, give her something to eat. Now I wonder how the little girl felt as she lay dying. I wonder how her mother and father felt as they watched their daughter dying. I wonder how Jairus feels when he is with Jesus and hears that his daughter is dead. I wonder why Jairus came to Jesus for help when so many of the leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes in the synagogue, did not like Jesus and did not believe him. In Jesus' day, when a woman was bleeding, people thought she was unclean. No one was to touch her or go near her, and she was not to touch anyone. I wonder how this woman felt when no one would touch her, hug her, or even go near her for 12 whole years. I wonder how she feels now that she is healed. I wonder who she will hug and who will hug her. I wonder what the crowd thought when Jesus called this woman daughter. In Jesus' day, when someone was dead, they were considered unclean. No one was to touch them. I wonder what the people thought when Jesus went into her room, reached out, and held Jairus' daughter's hand. I wonder what is the same about the story of the woman who was bleeding and the little girl who was dying. And finally, I wonder what you are feeling and thinking after hearing this story.